I wanted to talk about God of War because I recently finished it and I ended up making a video that ended up being 54 minutes long, which I did not expect. I made like it was just uncut 54 minutes, and I was like, I have to uh, either cut that down or just summarize the things that I said in it, and so that's what I'll try to do. And I've already wasted 30 seconds, so here we go. Just a little bit of context. God of War has always been one of my favorite franchises. God of War, Final Fantasy, and The Witcher. Not all Final Fantasy games, certain entries in the franchise. So speaking of God of War, I've played all of them and I've enjoyed them. And it introduced me to Greek mythology, which became one of my favorite things. And so when they released the E3 trailer for the new God of War, and I saw how they had changed everything from the ground up about the game, including the perspective and the combat and the inability to jump, I was like, oh my god, Sony Santa Monica, it's gonna screw up one of my favorite franchises. And 5 weeks after its release, when I finally got the game, I was pleasantly surprised. I did not play anything else after I started God of War, and it was just incredible. It was better than anything I could have expected. Graphic-wise, although graphics is not one of my priorities, let's say, and I've played games that have looked so good, but were terrible games at the end, and I've also played games that weren't exactly graphically impressive, but were very great games, and one of my favorites, such as Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight actually has a very cool art, and it's one of my favorite games, but I'm talking about graphically impressive, right? So graphically, the game looks amazing. Dude, I took 200 screenshots. I think it's exactly 200 screenshots in the game from beginning to end, and I've never taken that many screenshots. Oh yeah, and like the graphics, I could not believe that this was a PlayStation 4 game. It's just amazing. The shadows, the reflections, the water. I was walking the first 2 hours of the game. I was walking, when you move the left analog stick just a little bit forward, you can just, not run, you can just walk slowly. And so I was doing that for a lot of the time, especially the first 2 hours of the game. I was just going around and moving the camera, like looking around and just admiring the architecture of the place. And I was like, how did they create this? And by the way, Atreus, your companion, it's not one of those games where your companion is totally useless or doesn't do anything or is just there for comic relief or whatever. It's actually such a well-made character, Atreus, and he's actually so useful that when I was upgrading my character, I was upgrading Atreus before I started to upgrade Kratos. Well, I didn't completely max Atreus before I started playing with Kratos' abilities, but Atreus was, in fact, the first thing that I upgraded because he was so useful. And it's just so cool how they interact together. You can tell them what to do, basically, to a certain degree. The combat, although it's very different, it's like night and day from the original God of War games, but it is very deliberate, and every move you make is one you should carefully plan. Other than the combat is very cool. You can throw your axe at enemies, as I'm sure you've seen in the trailer, and you can call it back, and there is hand-to-hand combat, and all sorts of abilities that you can acquire based on your personal choice. There are stats in the game, such as strength, defense, vitality, stuff like that you can personalize according to what you find best. The lore is incredible as always, even better than always when it comes to God of War. The way the dialogue between Kratos and his son Atreus is very, very impressive, to say the least. It's very natural, it flows very naturally, and it's just so interesting. Even if you don't care about the story, you're gonna, if you play God of War. And there are these lore pieces that you find, which usually in huge games such as Skyrim or The Witcher, I usually reach a point where I've seen enough text that I don't want to read anymore. But God of War has spaced the amount of text and placed it in a certain volume where it's acceptable and it's actually desirable. And that's how you find out more about the what's going on in the game and the history of it. And it's all very interesting. Like you and your son, you as a player, Kratos and his son are all learning about the place you're in all together. The father and son relationship between Kratos and Atreus is a great journey. It's a great journey, and the relationship itself is a great one because the characters develop and you watch this development happening in real time, based on the journey you undergo together. And everybody has a father, or at least not everybody has a son, but everybody has a father or a father figure, so they can relate to this to various degrees. Other than that, I had fear. I had my worries when I saw the E3 trailer, and I thought they were gonna screw this up, but they could not have done this any better than they did. They've thought of everything. They've thought of things like if you want to go from point A to point B, and there's this dialogue they want Kratos and Atreus to have. Like for example, you're climbing a mountain, and they have this dialogue right while you're climbing, and they've measured the distance and as well as the time it takes for Kratos and Atreus to have that sort of conversation, even if you do not stop. Which I used to stop because I didn't want the dialogue to be cut off. But actually, at one point, like for example, I was rowing the boat with my I as Kratos was rowing the boat with his son Atreus, and then they were talking about something. And when I landed on the island, they were like, "Well," Kratos was like, "We'll continue this later on." And when they got on the boat later on, they actually continued to have that conversation just naturally, which was impressive how they thought about it. Another aspect is collectibles, which I, as a completionist, with games I love at least, I try to get 100%. Like I try to get the platinum trophy in the game, and so usually in games such as Assassin's Creed, it's so tedious to get the collectibles, and you actually sometimes have to resort to a guide to find them all. But with this game, I reached the end of it, and I found that I had 95% of the trophies without actually resorting to a guide online. The collectibles just make sense where you find them, and they're not tedious at all. In fact, the puzzles to open treasure chests, they make sense and they're very fun to solve, although they're optional. So if that's not your cup of tea, or if that's not your thing, you can just avoid it. And finally, one of the most impressive things about the game is that it has no cutscenes, and this has been a technological achievement in my opinion, because you can play the game, like you can just start the game, and if you do not die up to the end of it, it's just all in one go. There is no cutscenes, and even loading screens have been done so cleverly that you do not even notice it. So it has really changed my perception of old video games, where you know how every video game has cutscenes, but the cutscenes in God of War flow so naturally because there's this camera that never really leaves Kratos and Atreus, and everything that happens around you happens from a very intimate point of view, the way the camera is directed, and so there are no cuts in these cutscenes. Like the camera just moves around, and all the action happens without any cuts whatsoever. Like you have to experience it to see how great and how impressive and how insane Cory Barlog, the creative director of the game, has been to convince the producers and his team at Sony Santa Monica to adopt this strategy, and I think it has paid off very well, given how the scores, which I normally don't care about, or I usually don't care about, how it's one of the highest rated games on PlayStation 4, or any game for that matter. I think on Metacritic it has like 95 or something, which is incredible. I wanted to see the conclusion of the story, but I did not want the game to end because I knew I would not be with these characters anymore. I am playing. I am planning on playing the game again on the hardest difficulty. Give me God of War. Um, but I want to give it some time to, like I don't want to have fatigue from it. I really love the game, and it's definitely a 10 out of 10 for me. And I think everybody who owns the PlayStation 4 or doesn't should get one and experience this game on their own, because trust me, it is worth every single penny. It's just one of these things where you have to experience in your lifetime to appreciate. Oh, and this is my God of War T-shirt that I got from Virgin Megastore some time ago. I think it was when God of War 3 came out. I hope they. Oh yeah, I think there are some at GK Games and stuff. There are new ones for the new God of War.